autonomous aircraft will actually happen even before driverless cars. A disruptive technology has to be inferior by definition to the current technology. It's too soon to tell whether hydrogen is going to be a bubble or will people actually force it to work.
Okay.
Many times, many of the technologies that didn't look like viable actually happened simply because people just blindly pumped in a lot of money to make it work. It's a global market that we are targeting, which means that we have to be globally competitive. And the only way we can actually be globally competitive is not just bring an India cost advantage in terms of labor and supply chain cost and all that stuff, but primarily a specific tech advantage. The space tech has that sexiness quotient about it. Right? So you do space tech, no matter how sloppy, and it's very difficult to do sloppy space tech and survive.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why it's actually sexy. Aerospace engineers are actually the harbingers of human civilization on this universe from now on. Because if you have to actually perpetrate the human race, right, you have to actually rely on aerospace engineers to go from planet to planet to planet. I think the education system has to change everywhere in the world.
Okay.
I think there is nothing specifically wrong with India.
Okay.
The problem is India is following the rest of the world and the rest of the world is wrong.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the KV Curious podcast. Our guest for today is Professor Satya Chakravarti, who is a prof at IIT Madras. He's also the co-founder of ePlane AI, Agnikul Cosmos, Calix.ai, Aerospropellers Energy, and a couple more ventures at the intersection of electric mobility and space tech. This is a deeply technical, at the same time, lighthearted conversation on the future of space tech, how Indian startups are really paving the way for India to be the global point of recognition when it comes to space technologies, future of electric mobility, future of drones, future of autonomous cars, autonomous flights. And we also speak about life on Mars, future of human civilization, life on other planets, and a lot more stuff. I hope you will enjoy this conversation. Thank you for staying tuned with me. Listen to Professor Satya Chakravarti on the KV Curious podcast. Hi, Professor Satya. Thanks a lot for joining me on my podcast. Super excited to learn more about what's happening at the center of electric flight, at the center of space tech, space policy, the more recent one, and much more. Thanks for being on my show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me with you.
Over the last 2 days, there's been a lot of news, a lot of noise around the new space policy that has been approved. Do you have any prima facie thoughts on it? Like, is something about it very exciting for you?
Well, the space policy has been in the works for a few years now. So it's not as if we are new to it. It's just that I think it was passed yesterday by the cabinet, which is a good thing. And I think it's very monumental, the whole thing, what they are trying to do with the space policy. Largely, I think the Indian government is trying to push a few different verticals so that we have an opportunity or we have a chance to push ahead of the rest of the countries, very similar to what we did in software earlier. So space is one of those. The other one is like electric vehicles. The third one is drones. The fourth one is hydrogen, maybe, and so on. So everything that is kind of like a new thing that's coming up for anybody else in the world, we are looking at it as like a level playing field that could be offered for Indians. And is it possible for us to actually leapfrog? You don't require a geographical advantage, like if you were to have oil under your soil
reserves, yeah.
Right. So all of that stuff. So anything that new that's coming up is actually seen as the new oil for India, right? And so similarly, solar, all of these things, is it possible for us to capitalize on when compared to what others have done? So solar probably is a slightly bad example. We woke up a little later, but a lot of other things that I listed, I think they are kind of very fresh, that we can take the lead and leapfrog or whatever. So that's where space actually scores, where we have a large potential that's been created by ISRO. Now the question is, how do you capitalize on that? How do you increase your share of the space economy from what it is at 2% with what ISRO has been able to do so far, with the bandwidth they have as a single organization, and unleash that prospect because the technology, the know-how, all of that stuff is residing within the country. It's at par with anywhere else in the world. So is it possible for us to utilize it and expand our capability for improving the economic share that we can clock? That's what the fundamental premise of this entire policy is. And I think it's a fantastic thing.
Okay, so when you say that in any of these new prospects are being looked at as oil for India, is it more so solely from the mobility perspective, or is it in general about power generation?
No, I think all the stuff that I talked about are not necessarily anything to do with mobility or power generation, or it's all about money, right? So it's all about growing the GDP of the country at a faster rate, and hopefully a job-full growth rather than a jobless growth, and so on. So that we have a demographic dividend to take care of. So we need to provide very good high-class jobs to a lot of people, right? So all of these opportunities will have a multiplier effect on the economy. So it's all about the economy rather than any particular thing like a mobility or a power generation, right?
Okay,
so I think that is the overarching concern. Yeah.
Okay, I get the underlying economic objective, but in order to cater to the economic objective, there needs to be some, let's say, foundational technical, progress or advancement that we have to make, or in some cases, maybe an advancement in terms of utility that we can derive out of these particular activities. So when we particularly speak of, let's say, begin with space tech, what is certainly the outlook, or what is the vision that we are even, progressing towards? What is the objective to be met here?
Space tech is actually a very good example of a very deep foundation that we have as a country, because I think India is one among some 5 or 6 spacefaring countries in the world. And ISRO has had a long record of doing things at scale and also very frugally. So they may not have actually made the biggest rockets and so on, but whatever they have done, they have actually done it a fraction of the cost is, equivalent achievement elsewhere. And space is actually very unpardoning, right? So the gravity is the same no matter whether you're launching out of India or the US, right? So you have to have the space pedigree in terms of technology. So that technological outlook, the technological capability is residing in the country. Question is, how do you build on that for economic building, right? How do you get a multiplier effect on the economy out of this is fundamentally what this is all about. There are other things where, mobility and power generation, all of those things are actually a lot more straightforward in terms of how it impacts the economy. This is where we are actually sitting on a gold mine, so to speak. How do you leverage it for the economy is a different paradigm, because the entire world is starting on EVs, the entire world is starting on solar and all that stuff. So we have a level playing field. In space, as far as technological capability is concerned, we have a level playing field, but we have not been able to translate that into an economic benefit. And that's what we are trying to see if we can unleash now.
Okay, and through what particular path do you think can the economic output be unleashed? Is there a specific application that you think, or is it more to do with we build the tech and then the output of our tech is going to be used by remaining countries and they're going to pay us in better dollar amounts? What exactly is the approach?
Right. So first of all, I don't think India is actually limiting itself to any one particular aspect of space tech. Saying that this is what we want to do, this is not what we won't do, and so on. Again, the reason being, ISRO actually has been a vertically integrated organization.
Right.
And they have a huge amount of depth in launch vehicles, satellites, applications, payload development, all of that stuff, the entire stack. So that essentially means that the private sector that is getting into space technologies can aspire to dive deep into any of these for the benefit of commercializing these. And the world is going to be the customer, because we will not really find all of that customer. So this is actually, again, a very interesting part about space tech when compared to, let's say, EVs or other things, right? So look at EVs. India being a customer base, India being like a large market is a given.
Yeah.
Whereas in space tech, it's actually world class. It's not only is the science world class because G equal to 9.81 meters per second squared everywhere, more or less, right?
Sure.
Give or take a couple of decimal places off, right?
Yeah.
But so that means you have to beat gravity the same way everywhere and so on. So the market is also global. And to answer your question, whether it is launches, whether it is satellites, whether it is imaging, whether it is communication, right? Any applications that we're talking about, we essentially want to pander to the global market, and we would like to actually be at the top of the global market. Now, then the question is, hey, is it possible for you to actually compete with the likes of a SpaceX or a Ariane or any of those things? Well, that's an interesting part. I think ISRO was always configuring itself to do what it takes for it to fulfill its national needs. So that means that largely they would be looking at government payloads, for most part. And then the government payloads are configured based on a certain need, like let's say ocean imaging or education or or medical telemedicine or any of those things. And then they would configure payloads, and then they will actually put them in a satellite. They will then try to slot it into either an Earth observation satellite or a communication satellite. Then you have an IRS or an INSAT. And they kind of like percolate down to then is it going to ride on a PSLV or is it going to ride on a GSLV? All of that. So we actually develop the PSLV, we develop the GSLV, and so on. So this is how actually it's percolated down.
So it's been top down always.
It's been top down in the sense the motto, right, on what we need to achieve has been top down, right? So we have to. Why would I actually make a launch vehicle? Because I have to launch a particular satellite to undertake a particular mission required for the nation. That's how they have always been doing this. Whereas in that, they have essentially developed rockets of, let's say, an intermediate class. They have not really done rockets that are as big as what other people have done. They will be doing, they probably are going in the direction of making bigger and bigger rockets, but they're also actually downsizing and making smaller rockets that are more nimble to launch with only 6 people and a turnaround time of 1 week. All of that stuff, like thinking like a startup, is also something that they're doing, right, to keep up with the times. Now, while we are now talking about is replicating that in the private realm, we are not thinking of immediately rockets that are like the SpaceX, or even SpaceX as a private entity is more new in the US, but private rockets have been there for a long time in the US, right? So you have the Atlases and the Centaurs and all of those things. And we are not talking about any private venture that is trying to mimic those, right? We are still talking about making much smaller rockets that are probably going to hurl about 100 kgs into space, or a 300 kgs or a 500, 600 kgs, not in the tons class of rockets. Question is, how can we look at being like the next global players? We will want to be the global players in these segments. That's exactly what it means, right? In whatever we do, if we offer the best at the best prices, right? The best technology at the best prices, which we are capable of doing, then we become the best in this particular segment to begin with. And then from there, we can grow up. And so that is essentially what we expect can garner the world's space technology market over time. It may not be happening. So, in fact, I think we have fairly modest goals as a country to go from 2% to 10% by the end of the decade. So
2% of what?
2% of the global space market is where we are today, right? And from there, we probably want to go to about 10% by the end of the decade, which is not a bad deal.
Yeah. So the focus is largely on getting the infrastructure to an extent that this infrastructure becomes the most demanded solution for the rest of the world, instead of them trying to build their own infra.
Absolutely. In fact, if you find there are lots of countries around the world which also have space programs, but they don't jump into rockets right away. They don't jump into launching right away. The first thing that they will do is to actually try to make satellites. And why would they do that? Because satellites is actually closer to the application. So they have certain applications in mind that will fulfill their nation's needs, for which they will actually try to craft satellites. And I think it's fairly well accepted now is that it's easier to actually make satellites than rockets, right? So let's actually go do something, get somewhere as a space agency in the first place. Then there are a whole bunch of other private satellite companies in the first place, and so on. So all of these people need to actually go to space, and
Right.
there are only a few, much fewer launchers. So, and India is one of those, right? The question is it possible to actually offer a full stack of tech, right? For those who are making the satellites, can we launch them? For those who have payloads, can we actually make satellites? For those who have applications, can we develop payloads that can be put on satellites that can be launched? So try to actually have an end-to-end stack, right, is what the Indian space tech ecosystem is all about, in garnering the 10% from the existing 2%.
Very interesting. And early on, you mentioned ISRO already has enough capabilities, and it's just a matter of scaling it from here. Just curious, because I remember reading a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 months ago, that Agnikul tested its own private launch pad. What do you think is the need for another launch pad per se, or is it to cater to a whole different application altogether?
Well, ISRO's launch pads are massive, first of all.
Yeah.
And it would be a sledgehammer to crack a nut if you were to launch a Agnikul rocket from any of those ISRO's launch pads.
Okay.
Even the umbilical umbilical towers support structure will not even mate with
the size of the smaller
rocket. The rocket is actually so small. And therefore, we need to have a separate launch pad. But the point essentially is that we don't need a lot of space. I think our launch pad is actually about some 800 square feet. That's maybe like about the size of a two-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
Right. And that's good enough. And then our mission control center is just a cargo container, right? The mission control center. So extremely frugal.
So how do you manage the emissions?
The what?
The emissions during takeoff.
Oh, we have a jet deflector. Yeah, I mean the regular stuff. I mean, it's not as if.
But how do you consolidate it within 800 square feet?
No. The 800 square feet is just a piece of land where we have. So we have a barren piece of land in which the 800 square feet is now made into concrete bed, but otherwise it's open. So the emissions are.
Okay.
It's not like a closed walled room.
Okay, got it. Okay, interesting. So over the next 1 year, what do you think is going to be the most significant progress that we might make as a country in this realm of space tech?
We can expect to see a few private launches, first of all. Number one, ISRO itself is actually going to be gearing up to much more frequent launches and so on. So the thing about ISRO itself is they will actually be going in two ways. Number one, they will be trying to clock a more frequency of launches, and they will have a mix of commercial and government launches and all that stuff. The other thing is actually pushing the envelope on space tech development in the country, like a human space mission, going to Moon, going to Mars, or going to the Sun, right, or Venus, any of those kinds of space exploration, which is the kind of stuff that nations would be doing, right, instead of private companies usually. Plus things like, for example, reusable launch vehicles or air-breathing engines. All of that kind of technological push is what ISRO would be doing, right? And you will see a lot of that happening even in the next 1 year, as a matter of fact. I think the Chandrayaan 3 is planned for the next year. A human space program is probably going to happen in 2024, 2025, right? And so on. Plus SSLV will actually come up and you will be clocking about 12 to 18 launches. All of that stuff is the ISRO thing, which is going to be at a much more accelerated pace than what we have seen in the past, right? Both qualitatively and quantitatively. And in the private realm, we're already beginning to see satellites being developed and put in the orbit. Pixel has done that. Dhruva Space may be doing this. Galaxy may be doing this. So Skyroot and Agnikul could actually be launching. There are a whole bunch of smaller thrusters, like what Bellatrix would be doing, electric thrusters, or Manastu Space would actually be doing these reaction control systems. So all of these kinds of different aspects of the technology is going to come out in the next, maybe not 1 year, maybe 2 years. You can clearly see, I mean, in 2 years, you can see a lot more than what you can see in 1 year. It's going to be an exponential kind of growth.
So when we speak of this exponential growth, is it an exponential growth in terms of just the sheer volume of output that we have? The reason I ask this is because I want to tie back to the story of growth that we were speaking when we say that we plan for increasing the market share from 2 to 10% globally, is this solely going to be driven by the cost advantage that we are able to bring and thus replace existing players? Or is it that we are able to bring in new tech that's allowing for newer possibilities which weren't available before then?
It's mostly the latter, to be honest. The reason is very simple. The world is the market. It's not an India market at all, right? So we are not trying to do what like Flipkart did instead of Amazon, or let's say Ola did instead of Uber, and so on. It's a global market that we are targeting, which means that we have to be globally competitive. And the only way we can actually be globally competitive is not just bring an India cost advantage in terms of labor and supply chain cost and all that stuff, but primarily a specific tech advantage, which means, like, for example, if you look at an Agnikul, you will find this most integrated 3D printed. It's clustered and launched out of a container or a truck, and so on. There is like a lot of IP that we clock that is unique to us when compared to anybody else in the world, that we have an advantage with, right? So the tech is the one that actually brings down the cost. Or put it another way, we do bring down the cost specifically with certain technology. If it's not for just doing a fancy technology, like I have a 3D printed rocket, we do this. What is it going to actually translate to in terms of a commercial advantage, right? Globally. That's a crux. You look at Galaxy, I think they are the ones who are actually doing a sensor fusion on the edge, right? With multiple sensors and so on. So they immediately let go of an excuse for not being able to image for most of the time, right? So if you think about it, the Earth observation satellites have an excuse for not imaging for about 3/4 of the time. Night times, there is no illumination. Daytime, half the time you have cloud cover. Right? What good is it? Like, it's kind of like a car which is just being parked in your parking lot for most of the time. Right? Right. So these glorified stuff, right? If you really think about their utility, so we have to actually see how to get rid of that excuse, and that's what Galaxy is doing. That's a huge technical, breakthrough in stuff, right? Or getting past an obstacle, impediment that others have actually not done. Those are important.
Very interesting. And does this, do you sort of see these advancements in space tech necessarily translating into something, something creating a paradigm shift in how the world communicates or connects, or any of the kind of existing applications we know as yet, but is going to be much more better?
Right. So the thing is, I think what the government is really hoping with unleashing the space policy and the private space sector and all that stuff is for the world to start realizing that India is actually a space tech powerhouse, just as how India has been seen as a software powerhouse in the last generation, right? From the 90s onwards through the 1990s to the 2020s, right? So that is actually going to be a paradigm shift. So in the next 10 years, you see a lot of rockets that are going up with a lot of satellites that are being made in India for the world, right? And a lot of global customers that actually come to India, or we go with our technology to the customer's doorstep and launch in their backyard or their, or take their satellites and launch, whatever it is. Any way, but we can think about a global transaction. Will expectedly position India's prowess in space as a paradigm shift, that India is actually good at space tech just as well as anybody else. Now, I think that's being recognized the world over already, right? But it's in its infancy. The common man on the street in a US city probably does not know it as much as they have stereotyped an Indian to be a software techie, right? So we will actually break those stereotypes and say we are actually good at, we are rocket scientists.
Okay. So very interesting. But barring the economic aspects of it, right? And clearly, if it's going to contribute significantly to the economy, there'll be a contribution to the GDP, per capita income will rise. All of the economic consequences snowball. We know that. But keeping all of these aside, what does all of these advancements mean for, let's say, a common man? And not necessarily in the US, like in India, what does it mean for a common man?
So space tech definitely has had very tangible benefits to the Indian common man for a very long time that
Correct.
ISRO has been able to bring. Right.
Yeah, and telecom has been one of the biggest.
Telecom is one of those,
Yeah.
Earth observation, lots of such things, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you very specific examples, right? 2014 or 2015, there was a cyclone that hit Visakhapatnam, right? And the entire city got devastated. I mean,
Right.
even about 2 years after that, if you went to Visakhapatnam and landed in the airport and you stepped out of the airport, you will find that large parts of the roof of the airport are gone. Okay, I mean, they did reconstruct the airport where it was required. So there was a lot of roof outside the airport, right? Which okay, you can have it as a good thing, but it's all gone. You can clearly see that, and they will replace it whenever they can, right? So they'll probably build a new airport when they can, right? So the city was actually devastated.
Right.
Not a single loss of life. How did that happen? So today we have much better cyclone tracking and prediction capability that allows us to do fantastic disaster management.
Right.
So, I mean, all these things are directly thanks to space tech, right? So this will only get better, right? With more ability to launch more smaller satellites that are more tailored to a particular need, right? And nimble to launch on demand and all of that stuff, right? Configuring what's exactly needed and all that. Right, this is actually going to get better for the Indian and as you said, communication, right? Data, particularly data, is actually going to become a huge thing, right? Access to data, access to the internet, all these things is actually going to become a very huge thing. So that is going to be a direct benefit, but there is a much more intangible benefit in my view, which cannot be measured, which is this thing that the world begins to see us as rocket scientists, right? And what is it in the average Indian?
Right? More opportunities at the end of the day.
No, it's actually more about feeling good about the opportunity, right? So if we feel that we can actually launch rockets, everybody actually moves up the value chain. They actually start aspiring to do something of a greater value than what they would have probably settled for, because they know it can be achieved well within our realm of possibility. So that the confidence building for the average Indian comes from space tech than anything else, right? So you could probably build the best washing machines in the world, okay, right? And making a good washing machine that will last 30 years may require very high precision engineering, as well as space tech, but who cares?
True.
Correct. So the space tech has that sexiness quotient about it. Right? So you do space tech, no matter how sloppy, and it's very difficult to do sloppy space tech and survive. And that's the reason why it's actually sexy. Right? So people actually immediately get inspired on their confidence, saying that, hey, we are actually in for something big.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So it's all about the tag of being rocket scientists, or capable of being rocket scientists.
Exactly.
I mean, just curious, do you ever think of stuff like life on Mars and human inhabitation on other planets and stuff?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time.
What goes on in your head?
Basically, aerospace engineering is ingrained in every cell of the body.
Okay.
and if you're an aerospace engineer, you're just can't wait for the day when we will go to Mars, or and settle on Mars, and that's aspiration.
Okay.
And so all these things that we're talking about are all like little building blocks to get there.
Okay. Right? And what's going to be so significantly different about life on Mars? Like, why is it exciting?
Oh, very simple. The way I look at it is, see, if you looked at what happened with the world discovering and uncovering America. Okay. So of course, Columbus actually accidentally discovered America when he was actually intending to. You can look at it two ways. He was kind of like a brave navigator, but he was probably a lousy navigator and lost his way. And then he still actually held on to the fact that he was still discovering India. They're kind of brash, right? But that's Columbus for you. But so many people actually got there in droves, maybe because of religious persecution in Europe at the time, or whatever it is,
Right.
But they uncovered America, the newfound land, the new land, right? And so on. Today, the planet is actually in peril. Okay. So how does humanity survive this? There are two ways of doing this. One is, of course, reverse the reverse the calamity, right? The second is to have a backup plan. What's your plan B? All right. Now, if you think about it, the time scale it has taken for us to screw up the planet with global warming,
it's less than 300 years.
Right. So we just have to double click, copy paste the same screw up that we have done on Earth, on Mars, so that we can go live there.
So are you telling me we got to screw up another planet?
Well, I don't know, because if somebody else is complaining about it, then it's a screw up. But if it's actually better for us to go and live, it's not a screw up.
Okay, very interesting take. But I'm intentionally playing devil's advocate here. Right? I'm as interested about space tech, perhaps as you are, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Oh, hold on to your thoughts. So let's just complete this entire idea, right?
Okay, sure.
I believe that aerospace engineers are actually the harbingers of human civilization on this universe from now on. Because if you have to actually perpetrate the human race, right, you have to actually rely on aerospace engineers to go from planet to planet to planet.
Okay, so you've just taken food hopping as an idea and replicated it to life in general.
Correct.
But so far we have not.
I think you are going to play a devil's advocate.
Yeah, that's precisely that, right? The fact that so far we only know that Mars is one of the planets where life could be possible, or human inhabitation could be possible. And we have not, discovered this possibility with any other planet as yet, primarily because of the climatic conditions that exist there and stuff like that. So if we were to go with this idea and tell, okay, we've screwed up Earth, now let's go to Mars. Maybe we live 300, 400 years over there. But it's not going to be long before if any, the rate of screw up of that planet is going to be higher because our tech is more advanced, and consequently, the way we exploit tech is going to be worse.
Not true. Not true. That's where you're making a mistake.
Okay.
Right. So the tech that we actually developed in the 20th century is the one that has screwed up the planet.
Okay.
Right. So you should understand everything, right? So the technology that was developed since the Industrial Revolution, right, is the one that has actually been at such a massive scale progressively that we didn't really bother about sustainability, right? In fact, sitting in India, I have to actually face this question. Look, whenever you guys actually had to, when talking to the rest of the world, like the Western world, whenever you guys start to actually advance and progress and become economically prosperous and all those things, there was no question of sustainability.
Right.
Now it's our turn to actually become prosperous. And now you're suddenly saying we need to be sustainable. Right. Now, if I make this argument, that is only to actually rub against those guys and not to necessarily say that we won't be sustainable. Right. We have an added responsibility to actually become prosperous while being sustainable.
Right.
That is the latest technology. So the new technology is not necessarily going to be unsustainable. It has to be sustainable. We don't have a choice.
Okay.
All right. We have to be very responsible citizens of any planet that we are in. So it is not true to say that just because we are going to have new technology, we will actually go and screw up another planet at a faster rate.
Very interesting. So you're telling it's not that we build the tech, we screw up things, and then we do the damage repair. It's that we do it precautionary.
Absolutely. That is the current
approach to space tech. Yeah. Very interesting. And just as an outlier thought here, do you ever think about, let's say, economics and society in another planet if something were to be created from scratch?
Economy and society are like building blocks of. If two humans get together, there is a society, right?
Yeah.
If maybe three humans get together, there is economy.
Okay.
Yeah. Or maybe the other way, like 2 humans in economy, 3 humans in society. I don't know. Right. I'm saying like at that level, actually all these things have to be worried about.
Right, and rightly so, right? I mean, the reason I ask this is because all of these, much of this, what do I even say? Concerns arise primarily on Earth when we're speaking. What's the reason for space tech? Like you rightly mentioned, one of the primary objectives of space tech is to advance our economy.
Yeah.
And by advancing our economy, we just are trying to say that we as in whoever we identify as ourselves, which might be us as a nation, India, we want our folks to have more opportunities, more regard, whatever that is, and more power in terms of purchase, in terms of just living our life the way we want to. And rightly so, it's also going to sort of remain in another planet, and there's always going to be an early mover advantage. And this early mover advantage is largely going to be capital driven, right? Because the people who can afford it are going to be the early movers to Mars, let's say. And naturally, they tend to get some sort of monopoly. Don't you think so? And if that's the case, don't you think the kind of problems that we seem to have today economically in the world today is going to just accelerate more in another planet?
Well, the problem that you're actually talking about cannot be wished away. So long as humans are there, no matter where, you will have problems of identity clashes, all of that stuff. But if you have to actually follow history, right? The discovery of America as a new land, and its occupation and settlement into a few different countries, like the United States, Canada, Mexico, and all of those other countries, clearly tells us that the kind of nationalistic boundaries of the people who came from elsewhere is not exactly playing out the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you'll have different groupings. You'll have the same set of problems as anywhere else. You'll have the same politics. You'll have the same greed, all of those things will be there. Infighting, everything will be there. But there is no reason for us to believe that if a bunch of people actually went from, Earth to Mars, right? They will actually fight along some Indian versus a Russian or an American or versus a Chinese kind of lines. It's very likely that they will all gang up and say, we are all Mars citizens. We will actually, fight against Earth
citizens. Yeah.
The reason is they will actually be faced with a very common challenge that they have to go through there that unites them together on purpose, right? And they will find that, like, for example, why did George Washington fight against the British, right? So all you have to do is to look at a template of history and see what we can expect. So I don't expect just because India is having a first mover advantage versus whether the US or vice versa, that somebody is okay, fine, they will actually go plant a US flag there, or somebody else will go to some other place in Mars and plant an Indian flag there. Fine, all of that stuff. But those things will fall apart and then they will all get together.
Very interesting. So essentially, I think it extends far beyond the realm of space tech itself. The fact that you're telling what unites people is the challenges that they face together.
Correct. Absolutely.
Very interesting. Switching gears here, what do you think is happening at the future of autonomous flight or electric flight?
So there is a lot of drone work that's happening that's autonomous. And we have this gut feeling that autonomous aircraft will actually happen even before driverless cars, simply because the skies are, even if it is having passengers, that is, even if it is human occupied, that is
lesser traffic to deal with.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. So long as you can actually figure out your takeoff and landing, and so one way of dealing with that is to actually have like some very spacious takeoff and landing spaces, like what we have in airports. If you think about it, it's actually insane to have an airport today, in my opinion, but we do. Why should we occupy so much space for a bunch of people to take off, right?
Right.
If you think about the real estate value of what's going on.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
Right. So,
and it's not even passenger flight that brings in the cash flows there. It's mostly cargo.
Exactly. But we are actually affording like massive amounts of land for runways and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you're looking at vertical takeoff and landing in tight, very crowded spaces, aerospace actually commands that kind of attention that you can actually have a palatial space around for a takeoff and landing and say, okay, no obstacles and all that stuff. So you have very, very little to overcome. So autonomous flights can actually happen before driverless cars.
But do you think we are close to achieving VTOL?
Yeah, that is not a problem. VTOL is achieved. I mean, there are a few companies that have demonstrated VTOL, and they are ready to do autonomous VTOL. It's just that it's not regulatorily accepted for passenger flights, as well as we don't really have public acceptance of it yet. But the way I look at it is, increasingly, it's possible for us to actually do so much pilot assist that the pilot will have to take very little decision and let the machine figure out what needs to be done. And the passenger sitting next to him will wonder, hey, why is this guy getting paid for doing nothing? Right now, we don't get to see that they are not doing anything in the cockpit because we are not allowed inside the cockpit.
Right.
But if you have a VTOL with a passenger sitting right next to the pilot, and the pilot is trained to sit there and then watch the plane do what it's supposed to do, the passenger will start saying, hey, why do I need this guy? Why do I have to actually pay this guy anymore? Right. So it's a real question of public acceptance as a first step. And the problem with that is it will be a perception, right? So, and then for the perception to crystallize and then get the certification agencies to take the leap, saying that largely everybody is okay with a pilotless aircraft, right, for human flight, is when they will allow. I think public acceptance will even come before, certification.
But this perception is, I think, contradictory, right? For instance, on roads, I think we are already much more comfortable with the idea of a driverless car, while although the risk of accident is higher in this case. And in case of flights, since you brought up the point of pilots being paid, the way I see it is pilots are being paid not because they can fly the flight, but they can prevent the flight from crashing in case of emergency.
So it's not about the probability of accident in a car. It's the level of catastrophe of that accident, right? No matter how less probable it's going to be in a flight, the catastrophe of that accident is going to be so bad that people don't want even one accident, right?
True.
I need to charge my laptop. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. No problem. So in that case, don't you think pilot, simply because of the risk and the responsibility that the pilot takes, all of those economics and commercials are justified?
No, it is. It is justified as of today. Right? We still don't think that we can have the machine do better than a pilot. That's our current thinking.
Correct.
Right. But it's very likely to change the moment. It's very likely to change as we go forward a few years, not even like a very long time later. Number one. And when people actually start sitting next to the pilot and seeing that the pilot doesn't have to do anything, which is actually the case even today in big planes, but they don't get to see it.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Very interesting. And you're talking mostly about passenger flights, right? But one thing, at least based on my understanding, as I study electric flights and stuff, is by design, electric flights are designed to carry lesser passengers. There's some level of perception and telling that it cannot be designed to carry 380 passengers or whatever, maybe smaller, pools of passengers. What do you think is the economic consequence of this?
The fact that larger electric flights are not economically viable is coming from a view that we have had based on fuel-powered flights in the past.
Right.
Okay. So let's actually go through that mechanics a bit. All right. Now, fuel-powered flights have this following feature that as the plane moves forward, the fuel gets expended and the plane gets lighter, and therefore it can actually extend its range, right?
Correct.
For a given total amount of fuel that you started out with.
Right.
All right. Whereas an electric flight will have batteries. They are only transacting electrons.
Yeah.
And the mass of the battery does not change.
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, the battery mass is going to remain the same. You don't have this capability of extending your range by getting your aircraft to be lighter.
Yeah. Energy density remains constant.
Right. Yeah. The energy density is the same, is remaining constant for the fuel through its flight, but it's actually getting converted to a gas that's expended.
Correct. Yeah.
Whereas here, that is not the case, right? So the aircraft is not getting lighter.
Yeah.
So what are the consequences of this? The consequence of this is a larger aircraft that is fuel powered actually gets to have a larger range when compared to an electric aircraft, no matter how big it is, will have pretty much about the same range.
Correct.
Okay. Now, transform this into the economics part of it.
Mhm.
So we did this long back as in like in 2017-ish, right? We took data for about some 50 aircraft that are there in the world, fuel powered,
Okay.
plotted the range on the vertical axis with the number of passengers on the horizontal axis.
Okay.
You will find that there is a huge scatter in the small passenger category on what range you can get. You
Mhm.
can get a range anywhere. For, like, say, for example, if it's a two-seater, you may get like about 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers. Four-seater can be anywhere between 2,000 to 4,000 kilometers. That is like a range that is
Correct.
actually
Scatter
double
is huge. Yeah.
value and so on. The scatter is more.
Yeah.
As you go to higher and higher number of passengers, you now get like the scatter to decrease. And of course, the number of planes that have larger passengers also comes down,
Mm.
right? And you now get like this trend that goes like an increasing trend that sort of tapers off as you increase the number of passengers.
Mhm.
That is simply because as you're getting the plane to be larger, the wings are larger, you can actually put more fuel in it, right?
Mhm.
Of course, you have to carry that fuel, all right, but the fuel has a huge amount of energy density,
Right.
right? And therefore, every drop of that fuel actually helps. And as I said, it expends itself as gas. Therefore, it can extend the range, and this is what you get.
Mm.
Whereas if you try to do this for electric aircraft, no matter what the size of the aircraft is, the range for the same weight
Is going to be constant.
it's going to be constant.
Yeah.
You will actually get, with current energy densities, you're not going to get more than about somewhere between 200 to 300 kilometers.
Mm.
All right, keep this in mind.
Mm.
Now, why did this economics work out so far? All these aircraft actually have been made in the West,
Mhm.
designed in the West for Western markets.
Okay.
And FAA and EASA actually develop standards that a DGCA in India or any of these other countries are just taking in toto,
Blindly following.
establishing the airports and the runways and the ATCs and all those things. All the infrastructure is actually given by the West.
Mm.
Okay, that means we are actually squeezing their sense of economics into our markets.
Right.
Whereas in India, you have so many people,
Mm.
which means if I'm going for a very short distance, I
Mhm.
can find a lot more people wanting to go that distance when
Mhm.
compared to in the West.
Mm.
I don't need to worry about like a shorter distance for a longer plane anymore.
Mm.
Okay, so an Indian market is actually better suited for electric planes that can get larger and larger, even though their distances are not very high. We can break this pattern of longer range for larger number of passengers.
Mm. And you're telling it's possible because we have a higher density of airports.
No, in fact, we need higher density of airports than what we have today. That's actually the fact.
Okay.
Okay, the other point about the fuel powered planes is,
Mhm.
I'll give you examples. A four-seater Cessna today has about 1,600 kilometers.
Okay.
How many times does a Cessna actually fly a single sortie of 1,600 kilometers? Very rare,
Very rare. Yeah.
right? You take like a Boeing 737
Mm.
that flies all the time commercially, or
Correct.
Airbus A320. All right, it has about some 150 passengers or something.
Yeah.
Its range is of the order of about some 6,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's actually flying only 1,000 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers, not more than that,
Correct.
right? Which means that combustion has actually been an overkill for most of aircraft applications. On the other hand,
Mhm.
right now we have a problem that if I'm about to actually convert them into electric planes, I will actually get not more than about 200 to 300 kilometers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's say this one, what do you call, the batteries become slightly better than what they are today
Mhm.
in the next 2-3 years.
Mhm.
Okay, not too far. I'm just talking about
Sure.
like 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we are able to actually get more like 400-500 kilometers.
Okay.
Okay, you won't believe there are about 32,000 passengers that are actually traveling by air from Chennai to Bangalore, which is only 350 kilometers apart. And most of them are actually jet aircraft, not even turboprops.
Mm.
Okay, so where is all that stuff happening is because you would say, I want to go 300 kilometers, you will find a pile of people in India. That was not the case
Right. Right.
elsewhere so far.
But
So
but
why
even
do you
when we
actually force fit a market economics of planes that were made elsewhere
Mm.
and then deny yourself the latest technology in a new market?
I completely agree, right? And I completely agree with the fact that there are enough number of passengers willing to do shorter range travels or requiring to do shorter range of travels. But if you, by sheer number of volume of passengers making air travel today, I think this is likely to be amongst the metro cities, right? So if you were to consider a Bangalore to Mumbai or a Bangalore to Hyderabad or a Bangalore to Kolkata or Delhi, all of these are above 1,000 kilometers. Delhi can go up to 2,800 or something. Kolkata is on the similar lines. Hyderabad and Mumbai might be around 1,000 kilometers. Except for Bangalore to Chennai, none of these are below 500 kilometer range.
Correct.
So when we speak of these longer, slightly longer ranges, how do you think electric flight can match those requirements?
Yeah. So always a new technology starts out to be inferior to the existing technology.
Sure.
Okay. And the guys who are actually adopting the new technology and commercializing it will have to actually explore newer markets than current ones. All right. So this is, I'm not saying this, by the way. So this is there is a book called The Innovator's Dilemma.
Okay.
All right. And the tagline of the book is actually more interesting. It says, how do large companies fail?
Okay.
That's what this book is all about.
Okay.
Right. So it's written by a guy called Clayton Christensen.
Okay.
Who actually has enunciated this whole thing. All so-called disruptive technologies. I think this was written in the mid to late 90s.
Okay.
And I think for a guy that has come across this word disruptive technologies or technology disruption or all of that, right? Disruptive innovation, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I can't think of having come across this term in the mid to late 90s. It's much later that's come out in the public.
Correct.
So it's very likely that he was the first one to use this term. And what he really means is that a disruptive technology has to be inferior by definition to the current technology, because the current technology guys, they're called the incumbents, right, will be focusing on the current markets that they serve with the existing technology, right? The disruptive technology has to find new markets to serve from which it will grow. And as it grows, it now becomes competitive with the existing technology, but it has actually entered a new technology at a lower price point. And therefore, it can actually have that price point advantage that will unseat the existing incumbent. That's how the big company is. Okay. In this case, the thing that we have not brought into the mix is I'm going only 350 kilometers.
Correct. The new markets we have not tapped into.
Right. So I'm actually having a restricted market.
Correct.
Now, give you an example. Today, for example, I think India in the last 8 years or so, or less than 8 years actually, I think they started only in 2016, right? With this UDAN program and all those things.
Correct. Yeah.
But it's gotten along with opening up more than double the number of airports as existed from independence till that time.
True, very true.
Okay, so actually we have now increased the number of airports by threefold in the last 6 years or so.
Yeah.
All right, than what it was.
Yeah.
Aircraft fleet is actually getting multiplied by a factor of 3 as we speak in the same duration.
Okay.
And so this is a massive expansion of aviation in the country, where airports are actually getting closer and closer, because more and more newer airports are actually getting open. Okay. Why is that possible? Because people want to get from place A to place B ASAP.
Yeah.
Right. And there are enough of those people. So what is the catch here? If I do an electric plane, I can offer the same ride at 1/3 the cost of what it is today. Now, the problem that we have in Indian aviation is the entire structure is driven by Western technology, as I said, which means the cost for the airline is the same as that of an US airline or a Western airline, maybe except the salaries. All right. But everything else, the compliance is exactly the same, right? Fuel prices are pretty much the same. Or maintenance is, you have to actually follow the standards. MRO, everything is the same. In fact, MRO may cost you more because you don't have enough MROs. You have to fly a plane to Singapore,
right,
and so on, right? So today, for an Indian airline to actually be profitable, that many times Indigo seems to be, is a phenomenal thing. But the price point that we are actually offering to the customer is actually on the floor, very similar to telecom prices that we have in India. These are actually amazing things that nobody talks about, right? How are they even managing this? I mean, an American business will actually find it very difficult to actually even manage this.
They must have some kind of operational leverage, some kind of optimization.
They have actually figured out every paise.
Yeah.
Right. Today, for example, a passenger seat per kilometer is only 5 paise. Do you know this?
Wow. Okay. Haven't done that. Yeah.
Seriously.
Okay.
Okay. Or 5 rupees. Take it back.
Yeah, that's more realistic. Yeah.
5 rupees. Made a mistake. But they are actually trying to shave every paise. That's what I meant.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense.
Think about it, like 350 kilometers, right? Into 5, like about close to 2,000 rupees, 1,750 is like what an Akasa or anybody is actually charging today.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. It's actually 5 rupees.
It's comparable to a 2-tier AC train.
No, I mean, like, it's comparable to an auto rickshaw.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. How do you get there? Right. So I mean, the rest of the world actually can't even compete with these guys in terms of frugality.
On a lighter note, be it space tech or be it a Mars orbiter mission, we don't seem to let go of auto rickshaw.
Exactly. Right. Auto rickshaws are gold standard.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in this mix, I actually throw in an electric plane.
Yeah.
Right. My asset cost is actually a third. My operating cost is a third. And my maintenance cost is a third. All of a sudden, I'm actually bringing it down to less than about 50% or 40% of what it used to be. Wow, the only problem I have is the pilot cost.
Correct. And that is also gone now because it's...
Well, let's not push the envelope on autonomy yet.
Okay,
right?
Sure.
I'm saying that, let's say in about 3-4 years, the battery will actually push you to 400 kilometers instead of 300 kilometers.
Okay.
It opens up a lot more very specific markets, right? And my cost is very low. And I can pass that on to the passenger, right? I can easily attract people to actually jump on a plane, right?
Yeah, and it makes much more sense given the fact that work from anywhere is becoming a norm.
So people can actually commute from Mysore to Bangalore every day. Why would they want to actually put up with, a Bangalore air traffic? If for example, Bangalore opens up the older airport, right, and you have electric planes going from Mysore to Bangalore, Hosur to Bangalore, right, or Kolar to Bangalore, right, Hassan to Bangalore, right. I am actually now. I mean, do you want to start an airline? I'll make electric planes for you, right?
Sure, sir.
Business.
Right. Very interesting. And
so this is something that a lot of people don't think about from the West. And that's because aviation has been a Western import. We have to think ab initio.
But one of the common concerns that arises when we speak of electric powered vehicles, whatever be the vehicle, is the source of electricity itself, right? Does that concern you, or do you have any surpassing thoughts on that?
I think if you were to listen to this guy called Tony Seba.
Okay. Haven't heard of him. I'll check out.
Right. So TonySeba.com. I mean, very simple.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So in 2016, he was basically saying that by 2030, all cars will become electric. Whereas a lot of countries are actually trying to think of setting audacious goals for converting, the entire cars fleet in their countries to electric by 2040 or so. All right. And they're also getting a pushback from the automobile companies saying, hey, don't be so aggressive and all that stuff. But just by sheer economics, he actually says that by 2030, we will actually get there.
Okay.
Okay. It's nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with, anything else.
Okay.
And their question is, where is the power for all of that coming from? Okay. Because that's a fair question to ask.
Correct.
And in his assessment, it'll be solar, because the solar prices also will actually come down and become affordable.
Okay.
All right. Now, if I were to take an electric aircraft, right, and if I would actually compare it to the car, all right, and a typical car typically is doing a commute within the city. So the comparison there is actually an eVTOL, right? An eVTOL actually does a lot better capacity asset utilization per day because the trip across the same pair of destinations gets done, particularly in an Indian setting, in
Faster.
a factor of about 5 or 10.
Hmm.
So I can do about somewhere between 5 to 8 times a road taxi travel,
Correct.
right? So if cars can actually get their power from solar,
Mm-hmm.
I don't need, for example, if there are 12,000 taxis in a city in India,
Mm-hmm.
I can clock the same number of trips with far less number of planes.
Correct.
All right. So I'm not thinking about a big jump from, it's not like we are going to wipe out all the taxis overnight and then put
For
planes
sure. Yeah.
right in the sky. But this mix is actually going to be a very small number when compared to what exists today. That can be, catered to with solar. And by extension, I would say the same for electric planes.
And what do you think will result in the cost of reduction of solar?
Or the solar prices, the solar panel prices, all that he
Yeah,
did.
but what do you think is going to cost a drop in solar panel prices? Because at least by far the bottleneck that we have is the efficiency of each cell, right? Which is the Shockley-Queisser limit that we have, and the efficiency.
So one of the things that a technologically savvy guy is always after is to improve efficiency.
Correct.
A economically savvy guy doesn't care about efficiency; he cares only about cost.
Okay.
Right. It's kind of like mimicking nature. You look at the photosynthesis that trees go through with chlorophyll and all that stuff. It's actually an extremely inefficient process.
Mm-hmm.
The tree doesn't sweat, right? It just grows more leaves. So the question is, what is the cost of your solar panel is basically what it is. Don't worry about the efficiency.
Okay, so basically you're telling if the adoption increases, it's naturally going to drop down.
That's exactly what's happening anyway.
Correct. Okay.
Right. Or massive scale of production will actually bring down the cost and increase its adoption. And even if it is inefficient, we will obviously push on the efficiency over time. That's not a problem.
Very interesting.
But you don't want to wait until efficiencies become higher and higher. You rather focus on bringing down the cost of production at scale.
Very interesting. Well, I know. So what do you think about much of the effort that's happening in the world of hydrogen-powered vehicles or just hydrogen power in general? Particularly given the fact that hydrogen as a percentage of atmosphere itself is one of the lesser available elements. If we were to ever consider of hydrogen power, it basically means we have to think of more artificial methods of synthesis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. In my view, I think it's too soon to tell whether hydrogen is going to be a bubble or will people actually force it to work.
Okay.
Many times, many of the technologies that didn't look like viable actually happened simply because people just blindly pumped in a lot of money to make it work. So if enough people pump enough money, right, you reach a point of no return and you will have to somehow make it work. Otherwise, they're on the face for the entire, let's say, the VC community or the guys.
Feels like unicorns, but okay.
Right. So the guys who actually put in money with the VCs, right? That's actually the HNIs and ultra HNIs.
Yeah.
So the big people in the world will actually feel really, really terrible if it did work. So they'll actually try to make it work. Right. So this is how many times you get slaughtered into a certain technology. Right. I mean, if I were to think about it, electric cars were actually doing fine at the turn of last century, right? When they brought in the IC engine cars promising a longer range.
Oh, very true. Yeah.
Okay. Now, at the advent of the electric cars, which is like the 1890s and the 2000s.
1990s, you mean?
The 1890s and the 1900s, beg your pardon.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody told you, well, the IC engine is actually going to overpower the electric car. People wouldn't have believed. Right. Or actually even prior. I think the IC engine cars came about in the 1900s and 19-teens.
Correct.
And late 1800s, like 1880s, 1890s is when the electric cars were ruling the roost at that time. Okay? And if somebody told them at that time that 20 years later, IC engine cars are actually going to rule the roost and electric cars will die.
Mhm.
People wouldn't have believed at that time,
Mm.
right? What exactly happened? So it's primarily someone like Henry Ford who sets up this production line, right? And an assembly line. And in
Mhm.
fact, it's very interesting read on how Henry Ford sort of forced the automobile on the American public, by the way,
Okay.
right? The kind of tactics that he adopted is actually amazing.
Okay. Tell me more, sir. Like,
Right. So just like how in much later times, software companies did not really care about taking the brightest people. You
Mhm.
just go get into a software, what do you call it? Like a software,
service company.
no, like learning some quick software in some software institute.
Coaching institute. Yeah.
Coaching institute.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking.
Yeah.
And then you now go and then they will take you, no?
Mm.
So why is that the case, right? Because Henry Ford essentially said, I am not going to actually look for the artisan or the guy who actually crafts very well, the machinist and all those guys,
Mhm.
because they will actually stop the assembly line if they find a fault. And for me, the assembly line not being stopped is important. Therefore, I will actually hire guys who are not really good at their craft
Okay.
and let it go faulty. And I will have a quality control mechanism by which I will actually remove those that are actually, and then I will try to see how I can automate things and eliminate as much human error as possible. But assembly line has to keep moving.
Mhm.
So this is number one step. The second step is he actually paid all these lousy machinists a lot of money so that they will actually go out and buy his own cars.
Mm.
That's the reason. Okay. Now, all the fathers of all these guys who were otherwise very lousy had egg on their face because they had actually brought up their sons saying, hey, you have to study hard, you have to become a very hardworking machinist, you have to become. No, the same thing happened with all these software guys. I mean, for example, I went to IIT and then went to US.
Yeah.
Pretty soon I find a guy who has actually gone to some other like a coaching
Community
institute for
college,
software and then coming to US. So if going to US is actually where you're saying is
Goals meet.
that guy had a far. So why did that happen? Because you didn't really have to be a great guy to actually get a software job.
Correct.
So very similarly, he just brought down the limit for you to actually be able to get good jobs. And there was a generational shift. The values that their fathers had was actually completely eroded.
Mm.
And he started by actually advertising that a car is a good place for you to actually take long trips as a family and improve your family values by staying together for over, huddled in a small place, for a longer period and all those things.
Mhm.
But in 20 years, everybody had a car. Then he had to sell the next car for every family. And then family values didn't matter anymore.
Right.
You need to now try to peddle 2-car families.
Right.
Right. So.
And then families started locating themselves in cars.
Correct. Now, if a lot of money gets pumped in the wrong thing, that technology will take off.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
So it's got nothing to do with, economics and all that stuff, right? Somebody just pumps in a lot of money.
Yeah.
So if somebody pumps in a lot of money in hydrogen will take off.
Okay. But as such, as a tech, you don't think it's as promising?
It's not yet there because there are multiple problems with it, right? The first problem that you talked about is production.
Yeah.
Hydrogen is not necessarily the single, element available in natural form.
Correct.
To adopt, right? You have to actually split it from water.
Correct.
Okay.
And we are already at the shortage of water.
Yeah, in fact, hydrogen is not the most abundant element. Forget about.
Correct.
Water is available. Water has hydrogen, but still hydrogen is not the most abundant element on the planet.
Correct.
Right? In whatever form, even in water.
Correct.
Okay. So, and you have to split it. And that's actually, there is a, energy consumption there. Where is that energy going to come from? That is one point. The second, storage, transportation, handling, usage, safety, right? If hydrogen has to make sense, then people will say fuel cells is not far behind. Fuel cells are actually too expensive today.
Correct.
And we are not seeing fuel cells price drop at the same rate as what we have seen with batteries or solar panels or any of those as of today, right? And fuel cells demand very high purity hydrogen. And that will be actually even more expensive. right? And what about tankage for this? Are you going to use compressed hydrogen? Are you going to liquefy the hydrogen, right? And so on. So if you get into cryogenic hydrogen, the cost just goes
It
through the
shoots
roof.
up rapidly. Yeah.
Right. So I think people have worked out the economics, and they kind of say that all these things will make sense in certain niche areas, like maybe long distance trucks and maybe buses and all those things. But at the same time, you will probably find battery tech also trying to catch up, right? And try to compete with many of these applications and so on. So it's going to be a very difficult time to exactly predict what's going to happen. That's the reason why it's important to actually factor in who is pumping how much money into everything. That's the only thing that matters, finally.
Okay. So are you as an entrepreneur also running behind VCs? I'm sure by now VCs are running behind you for all the developments you're doing.
That's not true.
Okay.
It's always important for you to run behind the right kind of VCs, and that's very hard to find.
Okay, makes sense. So one more question here. You mentioned you went to an IIT and then got your PhD in the US. What really drove you back to India? Because at the time you were in US is around the time when really a lot of the boom activities were happening.
Yeah. So except that I was a dot. I didn't see the boom happening. No, but I was actually in aerospace, right? So I was in aerospace. I was in rockets, and so on. I think any of those booms didn't. I mean, for example, I was doing solid rockets, right? At the time, and any boom on SpaceX and all that stuff has happened only in the last 10 years.
Correct.
Right. We have not really seen a lot of boom happen in aerospace at all as much. So things boomed in software. So if I had continued in the US, and if I were to have made any mark or money or whatever it is, it might have been in software and not exactly in my solid rockets aerospace engineering. But typically aerospace is actually very funny. Like if you hold on to aerospace, with a lot of grit, you can actually come up in life, but it'll take a lot of effort for you to actually hold on to aerospace and so on. Whereas a lot of people actually ask this question, and I have to think back and answer this. So I seem to have actually behaved like this Forrest Gump character who just has one goal and just goes with it. In my mind, basically what happened was, like a lot of my friends and myself who went to the US saying that, we will come back to India. And in fact, that's what everybody is trained to tell the visa, officer. Okay. And it's actually a very paradoxical thing. The visa officer wants you to come back, right? But the rest of the country there actually doesn't want you to go back.
Correct.
I don't understand that still, right?
Yeah.
Right. But I was actually truthful to the visa officer.
Sure. So as an extension to the previous question, typically there is a certain image that we have towards Indian professors, and somehow by all means you seem to bypass all those definitions and constraints. What exactly triggered the entrepreneurial bug in you?
I think the answer there is the combustion center that I had established at IIT Madras, of course, with collaboration with all my colleagues, a lot of my colleagues. But I was kind of like at the forefront of establishing this, and we got a significant pot of money to establish the whole thing that allowed for us to think a lot of fancy projects that would be difficult for typical professors to do anywhere in the world. And that allowed us to establish large facilities that are of industry relevance and so on. Being able to do big things became natural, right? So that didn't scare me at all anymore. And what is being able to do big things in the context of the entrepreneurship that we are in is to be able to develop tangible, high-value products like aerospace products,
For sure.
planes and engines and so on. Because to develop aerospace products is not a joke, right? It's not easy. However, we are always trying to do like a small engine or a small plane or a small rocket, because that's what you can do starting as a startup anywhere in the world, as a matter of fact, not even necessarily coming from India. It's a lot more difficult to do these coming from India in any case, because capital is scarce.
Yeah.
But as a startup, you're not actually immediately competing with a Boeing or a GE or
Correct.
or a SpaceX, right? And that doesn't make sense. You don't want to do that, right? So building even the small products that we are targeting to build is actually a big thing for a professor.
Correct.
But the combustion center allowed me to think that it is doable, because we establish fairly complicated engineering rigs and setups in the combustion center. I think that motivated me to say, hey, if we can actually establish a research center at this scale, it should be possible for us to develop products that will have a much bigger impact in the society than just confining ourselves to academia and the industry that we will serve, and indirectly impact the society, by arm's length.
Very interestingly, somehow, like you rightly mentioned, even getting the kind of setup for a research, setting is not an easy task to get the capital and the resources to do that. And you seem to have done it roughly 15 years ago. What do you think were some things you did right that allow you to crack the code?
I think at some point you have to actually give it to luck, because you can't have we can't pretend to have premeditated everything, right? You should be at the right place at the right time, and I happened to be at the right place at the right time and used the opportunity where there was a windfall grant that was coming from the government for establishing the combustion center, and I took the lead in it. I was at the forefront of putting all of that together and so on.
But one more one concluding question: if you were a 22, 23-year-old out of college today, what would you be doing in India?
Wow, that's an amazing question. I think I'll get into a deep tech startup.
Deep tech startup, okay. Into what? Like a core role?
Yeah.
Okay. Not a software role.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll reflect a bit on this, right? There seems to be I am the latest addition to that cult, maybe, in trying to say that the amount of opportunities remaining in core itself is so less, and largely by the market conditions, maybe in terms of capital available, in terms of resources available and opportunities available. And there's this large momentum amongst, let's say, civil folks or mechanical folks trying to drift towards IT and software and whatever the byproducts of those. At some level, it also intuitively is true that this needs to change. The buck needs to stop somewhere, and there needs to be more emphasis on the core folks as well. But what do you really think can drive this sort of change in momentum?
Startups. So when you say core, you are assuming that you need to get a job in an established company.
Okay.
Right.
Not necessarily. It's about putting your core skills to use is all I mean.
That is the basic definition of core.
Yeah.
But what does it practically translate to? I need to get a job in a industry.
Correct.
Right? That job is not paying you well.
Correct.
Something else is paying you better.
Sure.
And it's fair that you will actually have to obviously pick what pays you better. This is the current problem, right? You try to overcome that with your own company. You produce value that is going to actually pay you richer dividends over time, within a shorter time, maybe 2-3 years. You have to actually slog. Yeah, but increase your value tenfold. That's what you need to do. So come up with innovative products.
So as a core, as someone who is a trained mechanical engineer or aerospace or chemical for that matter, what are some, let's say, options to pursue, or what are some problem statements do you think is worthy enough for someone to pounce on?
There is a lot of mobility stuff that's happening because of electrification. There is a lot of metal 3D printing based product development that can be done. Heat exchangers now can be made much easier and so on. So I mean, there are lots of things. Like, for example, I think these things have already hit market from Japanese firms, like personal air conditioners, wearable air conditioners, for example. Right. So how did that come about? Because you have heat exchangers that can be 3D printed, very small pieces, and so on. Right. There is like a lot of thermal engineering that goes into it, maybe phase change materials and so on. So in fact, 23 is probably 23. Like, so you finish your bachelor's at 21, right? And maybe do masters, but you can learn a lot on your own about some really high-tech cool stuff that you can engineer your way through with simulations and so on. Because these things actually allow a level playing field today for somebody who is in a very big company elsewhere, in an MNC around the world, or yourself, right? So you just have to know how to apply these skills, and then you can actually come up with very innovative products. There is a company that keeps talking to me, where they are actually making wearable headbands with which they will tap your brain signals like an EEG and put it on an app with which they will help you improve your focus, concentration, and calm you down and all those kinds of things. Right?
What part about this, except for the design of the hairband, is core?
A lot. I mean, there is a huge amount of signal processing that goes into it.
Sure. I mean, that still falls under electronics, communications and stuff, right?
Which is core for the guy who is doing it.
Okay, sure. Okay.
Correct. Right. But the entire product cycle, right? Taking the signal and then trying to give a neurofeedback to the person who is actually using the app in order to calm him down, right? That entire stack. How do you manage that?
Right.
Isn't it? It's amazing how, like, these are people who are fresh out of college.
And you don't think it's necessary to have IP level productions happening? It's more about just try to take an existing tech, apply it into a way that has a certain market demand.
Startups clocking IP today have it better. Like, for just about 8,000 rupees, we can file a patent. Right. And if it's a startup file patent, they fast track it.
Correct. But in order to develop that patent is what all the effort is required, right?
True. So it's a question of, it's a trade-off. See, when you now take a startup, right, very few startups will be able to actually have their teeth gritting for about 5 years or so. Correct. To develop like something massive as like a rocket or a plane or an engine or something. These are all like some outliers, right? But I'm talking about a lot of smaller products with which you can actually offer services. So you can actually operate this product as a service, so that you are having a force multiplier on revenues for the same number of units that you're making, so that your margins are not linear. It's actually an exponential growth. So you're actually fitting into a startup mold, right? So these are all some new business models that we should, but you are actually creating value because you have the niche product with you that you can offer that nobody else can, right? You have that you're creating. So all the jargon that the startup guys have, the deep tech is actually the best way to do it.
Very interesting. This is super fun, sir. Thanks for chatting with me.